Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and my goodness, I have somewhat of a regular upload schedule now. Isn't that amazing? Yes, it has been quite different. Normally, I'm waiting 2 or 3 weeks in between videos, but here I am, just a couple days after my last video. But enough of that. You read the title, you know what this is. And some of you may be getting a bit of a deja vu sensation here, as I've talked about this very knife once before on this channel. Now, the knife in question, well, I'd show you the old model if I had it, but the knife in question is one of these. Now, this is an Arthur Wright Son Lambfoot. Now, this particular model is in stabilized spalted beechwood, and you can see it has a lovely grain pattern to it. But this was a limited edition from Moonraker Knives that I believe is still available. I don't know if they are. Don't quote me on that, but I think there's still a few of them left. Anyways, this pattern of knife, the Lambfoot, is a very classic Sheffield design. And you've got a straight edge with a fine point for detail work, and a bit of a swayback bulbous handle, which makes for a very nice grip. Now, I had another one of these. I've actually had a few. But one of them was in ebony. And I really, really liked that knife. But it did unfortunately have a very stiff spring. And in the past, I have found that very stiff springs can be a good thing, in the sense that they keep the knife from closing on you, and they give the knife a nice authoritative snap each time you open and close them. And to me, I know it seems a bit strange, but a knife that doesn't even click into place when you open it doesn't sound like a quality knife. Now, yes, there are friction folders and many others that don't really have springs, but that's aside from the point. I like it when my knives have a bit of a snap, and it just shows that this spring is not going to fail on you and close on your finger. So, this is a good spring, but the other model in the ebony was way too tight, to the point where it hurt to open at times. That knife broke. The spring snapped down the middle, and I theorize it was due to an over-tightened spring with brittle steel. You can get away with brittle steel with a light spring, and you can get away with a heavy spring with a more normal steel hardness. And I can say that as I've had quite a few knives with stiff springs that have never broken on me, and other knives that seem to have flimsier springs, but I'm not sure whether or not they were brittle. And either way, they still haven't broken on me. But it seems that those two things are a bit of a negative combination. But that knife broke a few months back, and just recently I got a replacement. This is the exact same knife pattern. This is a Lambfoot in ebony, but it's from a different seller. The first one I got at Heine Haynes, but this was from Steel City Cutlery, a store I've been promoting in the past couple days. As I got 3 knives from them, this is the last of the 3. They come in these nice black velvet pouches. And again, customer service from this shop was excellent. So if you're looking for an Arthur Wright, I very much suggest that you go and check out Steel City Cutlery, as they're a bit underrated. Now, here is the knife. Take this one off screen. And right away, you can see the spring is in one piece. This is a positive. You can also see that this is very clearly a nice dark bit of ebony wood with a very, very subtle grain. And ebony wood tends to be a stylish choice for knife handles. It varies in color. I was somewhat hoping to get the dark brown with some of the almost chocolate-colored streaks, but unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I got this model, and this is the more typical ebony, which is just this nice inky black, but very, very nice grain again. You have brass pins, brass liners, nickel silver bolster with a bit of a polish, although fingerprints tend to make that harder to pick up. There you are. Nice, shiny bolster here. And the blade, which opens with a stiff spring. Now, here's where I will say there's a bit of a difference. The first knife like this that I bought, the spring was so strong, if you put your nail in there, and granted I have pretty short nails at the moment, you could very well break it. There is a term, many of you probably have heard, nail breaker. And it is not an exaggeration. There are certainly knives out there that are more than capable of, if the spring is stiff enough, cracking your nail and essentially making it impossible to open any knives with that finger afterwards. Not a good thing. And it is a little bit more passable if they are pinchable, because then you can pinch them with 2 fingers, so you're not jamming a nail in there. But unfortunately, these knives are not really easy to pinch. You can almost get this one, yeah, you can get this one open, but it isn't easy. You do want to use your nail if you're getting the most optimal opening. But this tension is within limits. I would say that this is a nice spring. Don't know how well the camera can pick it up, but open and close it for a second. Bit of a nice thwack when it comes down. And when it opens, again, not the loudest of snaps, but it's definitely got a bit of tension behind it. Comparing it to my other Lambfoot here, this is the Spalted Beach model. This one's got a bit of a louder snap shut, and maybe a bit of a louder snap open, but the actual tension on this one is a bit lighter. I'd still say this is about a 6 on my personal 1 to 10 scale, but this one I'd say is closer to maybe an 8. Now, I could be concerned and say that that's still too tight, and this knife could be in danger of breaking, but I would like to hope that it can withstand a spring tension of, 8, maybe 9. But regardless, this is a nice action. It's not the smoothest in the world. Arthur Wrights usually aren't, but that's when they're new. They break in over time. Blade is satin finish, just like the previous one, whereas the limited edition is polished. Got a nice bit of a flat grind here. The edge is a tiny bit uneven, although that is my fault, as I am a mediocre sharpener, and I tried giving this a bit of a strop up when it was new. It wasn't sharp. It was a bit sharper than typical Arthur Wrights, but not enough that I would say it's ready to be used. So I gave it a bit of a touch-up. Now it's fairly sharp, but edge is a little bit uneven, but I've seen worse. The stamp on this one is thankfully not made in Sheffield. It actually says the brand. Wright, Sheffield, England. Transitions on the pins are very good. Bolsters are a little bit easier to detect, but they are by no means, I guess, dodgy. Blade centering is off, unfortunately, and the spring cutoff is typical of an Wright, which is to say, not spectacular, but if I'm going to judge this one, I have to judge them all. So let's look at the back. Gapping, holding it up to the light, it seems there is none. Although you could make a couple arguments that there are some very slight bits of it here, but my I guess you could say, gapping test is holding it up to the light. And if nothing shines through, well, then generally I'm not going to be bothered by it. Nice polish on the spring, as well as the liners and bolsters. And the treatment of the wood is quite good, I'd say. It's very smooth. There's no grain that sticks up or feels coarse. Makes for a pleasant knife in the hand. Do a quick measurement on this. Get this one out just as well. Okay, let's do a quick measurement. So we are coming in at just a little over 6¼ inches overall. Blade length, including the tang, is a little over 2¾ and the cutting edge, which is the most important part for many individuals, it's just a little under 2½. So this is a UK legal knife, no lock, under 3 inches. So this is a legal EDC. And to those that it may interest, handle length when closed is just, it's not quite, well, I guess I'll hold it flat. It's a little bit less than 3¾ So, not a large knife, would fit pretty well in the pocket. Now, my only real complaint about this knife, and this is something I have neglected talking about up until now, the blade is a little bit off, but that doesn't bother me since it's not rubbing. But there's a very slight bit of blade play. And in my last video, the spear point, I remarked about how Arthur Wright knives never have blade wobble. And I think the only time there was anything even close to it was one of my very first knives that I no longer have. There may have been a slight bit of blade play on that, but it was nothing worth really remembering or being picky about. This is the same. It's very minimal, and you probably wouldn't even be able to tell it was there if you looked at play at the pivot, but if you're holding the front of the blade, you can feel a little bit of give. Does this mean the knife is terrible? No. For around 65 Canadian, this was still a bargain, and I'm still very happy with this knife as a whole. I would like to hope this is not going to become a consistent issue with Arthur Wright, because their knives have always had flaws here and there. They've never been perfect before, but blade play is one of those things that if you don't have a reputation for having blade play now, keep it that way. You never should. And a lot of brands from the US seem to have fallen prey to that, Case being probably the prime candidate. I can't name a brand I have. Maybe Rough Rider, but Case and Rough Rider, out of all the knives I have, they tend to have the most blade play. My Sheffield knives have been thankfully spared from that, but again, this is very minimal. I'd actually compare this to the level of blade play I have on my Taylor's Eyewitness Premier Ironwood Barlow, and that knife is absolutely spectacular. So, I suppose I really should be more upset at the Barlow, as it's considerably more expensive than this, but in both cases, if the knife is primarily positive and there's very little to complain about, it's a lot easier to excuse those few things that are ever so slightly irritating. Although on the Barlow, little bits of blade play are worse. Again, price range is something a lot of people neglect when talking about flaws. and knives end up getting judged very harshly, despite being very affordable, whereas certain expensive knives, people tend to either judge them much, much more harshly due to the price, or simply because they see a high price tag and think that the knife looks pretty, they'll ignore some of the flaws that they should be paying more attention to. I try to be neither of these individuals. I try to look at each knife objectively and understand that price is a good factor to keep in mind when you're talking about a knife. And so, for that reason, I would say that this is a solid 8 out of 10. If it were centered properly and there was no blade play, 9 out of 10. And perhaps if the blade came a little bit sharper, I'd probably push it to 10 out of 10. Is this a collector's knife? No. Am I a collector being picky about it? Yes. Is this a good working knife? Absolutely. The spring is stiff enough that this will not close on you, really at any point, and it isn't so stiff that it becomes uncomfortable. So I am very happy with this knife, despite that ever so annoying, but ever so slight bit of play. But other than that, this is a great working knife. I feel like it would be very reliable, and I'm intending on using this one. There's no polish on the blade, so there's no reason for me to keep it shiny. I'm going to use this, and maybe in a few months I'll come back to it and discuss how it's performed, whether or not the play has gotten any worse, and just overall how it holds up as a carry knife. And here's hoping that nothing happens with the spring. So there you are, Arthur Wright and Son Lambfoot in ebony. And overall, yeah, I would recommend one of these if you're looking for a user knife that still has a certain degree of class to it and isn't boring. But if you're looking for something a bit nicer, but you still want a Lambfoot, perhaps consider looking into one of the limited edition models, or say the Stag or Ironwood. They tend to be a bit higher end. But either way, I like this knife, and I really like the retailer, so you may be seeing more of these. But then again, thank you very much for watching. This has been the Arthur Wright & Son ebony handled Lambfoot knife, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.